In this video, I really want to talk about fishing a jerkbait. A jerkbait has become one of my favorite techniques. I think I love every technique, but a jerkbait is a lot of fun, and it is a year-round bait. I know that, a lot of people know how good a jerkbait can be in cold water, and it definitely excels in cold water, but you can catch bass on a jerkbait year-round. And in this video, I really have 4 different tips, some things that I've learned about jerkbaiting over the years that I think can help you to catch more bass with a jerkbait. Now, before we get into the video, this one is brought to you by my apparel company, Finn Fishing. It is now the month of October, which means I have a new package deal over on the website. So right now, you can actually get a USA-made sun shirt and a bass hat, kind of a package deal, for 67 bucks. So as opposed to $84, so you actually save quite a bit of money, and you can kind of mix and match whatever sun shirt you want with whatever hat that you want. So it's real easy. Add the sun shirt that you like to cart, add the hat that you like to cart, you will see that automatic discount at checkout. Shopping at Finn Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel. I greatly appreciate all of you who have done so. All right, let's talk about the jerkbait. Now, real quick, before I get into the 4 big tips, I do want to talk quickly about the equipment that I like to use when fishing a jerkbait, because it's always something I get asked a lot. Now, the first thing I throw a jerkbait primarily on a bait cast rod. You could throw it on a spinning rod if you want. I don't think that there's any reason why you can't throw it on a bait caster though. There are jerkbaits out on the market, especially some of your balsa jerkbaits, like a Smithwick Rogue, for example. They are lighter baits, so it's actually easier to fish some of those baits with a spinning rod, although I still throw it with a bait caster 9 times out of 10. Now, I use straight fluorocarbon. Typically 10-pound test is what I like with my jerkbaits. I will go down at times to 8-pound tests. I have gone up at times to 15-pound tests. But usually 10-pound, day in and day out is what I have on my jerkbait rod. The rod itself, I think, is very, very important when it comes to jerkbait fishing. This is by far my favorite jerkbait rod that I've ever used. It is the ARC Tharp Series One-Eye Jack. It is a 6-foot 9-inch rod, so it's a little bit on the shorter side, which I actually like because you are working a jerkbait obviously a lot throughout a cast. And so if you're fishing this bait all day long, the longer the rod is, the more kind of you're gonna feel it in your wrist throughout that day. So I do like a shorter rod like this 6-foot 9-inch. This is a graphite rod. So the important thing when fishing with a graphite rod is that you wanna make sure that your rod has a very parabolic bend to it, which mine's all tangled up on the tip now, but that is what this rod has. You want a parabolic bend. Again, that's gonna help you to keep more fish pegged, keep more fish hooked when you hook into them itself. This particular rod is actually pretty whippy. Some people may not like it. I have found it to be just perfect. When it comes to the gear ratio, I typically have something in that 7 range. I think for almost every technique out there, you can get away with something in the 7 range. This is a 7.1-to-1 gear ratio reel. All right, that is the setup. Now let's talk about a few tips when it comes to a jerkbait. The first thing, and what I think to be the most important thing when it comes to a jerkbait, is that there is a big difference on certain days out there on the water when a jerkbait that slowly sinks versus a jerkbait that pretty much suspends versus a jerkbait that slightly rises is going to get you more bites than the others. And I have seen this in several different situations over the years. A lot of us, there's the most infamous jerkbait out there on the market, the Vision 110. It is a great bait. It is made to suspend, and it works really well suspended. But I've actually seen where this little Berkeley Stunna, which is actually made to slowly sink, will outfish the Vision 110 on days where it just seems like the fish want a sinking bait. To me, this happens when you are fishing fairly cold water, not like extremely cold water, but pretty cold water. That's when I like kind of that sinking bait. Now, I have heard, this is something that I just want to relay on to you guys because I don't know, I haven't seen it in person myself, but I was told by a Berkeley lure designer, which they go out and test lures all the time, is that when you fish a jerkbait in very cold water, so like the coldest water you can get away with, a lot of times in the probably mid 30s to mid 40s, having a jerkbait that actually slowly rises may be the best bet. And they've done some testing on it. I can't tell you that I have seen that, but that is just what they have seen in some of their tests. So the point of all this is just to know that there is a difference in a bait slowly sinking, slowly rising, or kind of staying more or less suspended. Now, one big thing that can impact your bait on whether it does that or not is the hooks that you go with. Every jerkbait out there on the market is kind of designed around the hooks that they know that they're going to put on that bait. That's how they know how much weight to put into the jerkbait to let that bait either suspend, rise, or fall. And so it's very important to understand that if you go to change out the hooks on your jerkbait, that you try to select a hook that is going to be like pretty much exactly the exact same in weight. So you can take a little like kitchen counter that's gonna measure in grams to be able to see how many grams a hook is. That's like one of the best ways to do it. And just know that, for example, if you put a little bit bigger hooks on there, a lot of times that's gonna make that jerkbait sink. And so that's not always a bad thing. Like I just talked about, I actually, a number of years ago, I was fishing a Vision 110. I had changed out the hooks. It made that bait sink a little bit, and I was catching a ton of fish because it was sinking. As a matter of fact, I lost that bait, and then I picked up the same Vision 110 with the stock hooks on it. It stayed suspended. I didn't catch nearly as many fish until I realized that bait was sinking before. I switched over. It was night and day. So just know that that's probably the biggest thing that can really cause a jerkbait to rise, fall, or stay suspended is the hooks that you go with. That's very, very important in my mind. All right, the next thing that I want to talk about when it comes to jerkbait, a lot of guys are going to talk about cadence. I want to talk a little bit differently, not necessarily about cadence, but actually the aggressiveness at which you snap the rod. This is something that I feel like you don't always hear about. You hear about guys talk about the cadence. And look, it's very important to understand that sometimes bass like a bait paused, sometimes they like it moving. But I think what's really important, and something that I have found out using forward-facing sonar a lot, is that sometimes you can have too aggressive of a snap on your rod, which will actually trigger fish to not like the bait. Sometimes they really like that aggressive motion. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes when I pick up a jerkbait, what I have found to do is really light snaps. So instead of kind of really popping that rod pretty hard and throwing the slack back in the line, it's more of just a little pop, 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 pop. I do that a lot more in highly pressured situations and in cold water. But as most bass fishing is, always experiment with it, because you may find that you got the right color, you got the right jerkbait, but maybe you're snapping that bait too hard, and that is causing fish to not hook up with the bait. It's something that I actually just saw this morning. I was out there fishing a jerkbait a little bit, caught a couple of nice fish on a jerkbait. I realized that I was snapping the bait a little bit too hard when I seen these fish peel off the bottom to hit it, and then they turn right away when I was really aggressively snapping it, which happens to me when I see fish coming up after that bait. But whether you have the forward-facing sonars of the world or not, you can still incorporate this in a cast. You know, make one cast aggressively snapping that rod, one cast a little bit more moderate, to see if you can find a pattern as to what the fish want, okay? Very, very important. The next thing that I want to talk about is the color of your jerkbait. This is something that I talk about color a lot in my videos. And the biggest thing that I talk about when it comes to color is I do not like to get into the color game, which means that I feel like 80% of the time you're out there fishing on the water, guys spend too much time in the bottom of their boat trying to figure out the perfect color bait that really gets the fish going, when like 80% of the time they'll hit a lot of different colors. With a jerkbait, I'm a little bit more specific on trying to figure out the colors that a bass likes. Now, I'm always gonna start out with my typical colors, my shad patterns, my bluegill patterns, my perch patterns, my translucent patterns, and then I'm going to kind of vary from there depending on if I'm getting a lot of followers. You know, you will either see followers with your forward facing or with your eyes. If you're bringing a bait through the water and you're getting a lot of fish that follow that bait all the way to the boat, typically that's a good sign that you may need to change up the color. So when it comes to colors of a jerkbait, I am a little bit more specific. I do think that because the bass are kind of in the same water column as a jerkbait when you're fishing it, they get a good look at the bait. And so that's why it can be very crucial to have the right color or to try to play around a little bit more with colors. So just pick up the baits that you are confident in always. But if you start to realize, hey, I'm getting a lot of followers, or hey, every time I catch a fish, it's hooked on the outside of the face, or it's hooked in the middle of the back, or maybe you're losing a lot of fish, even though you have a good rod that is a good jerkbait rod. That's another kind of clue to you that you may be using the wrong color. Just switch things up. I always like to keep, you know, a handful of jerkbaits right there, kind of in the front deck of my boat where I can just pick them up, throw a different one. Like if I get around some fish that I know are biting or in an area where I know they're fish, that's typically when I will experiment a little bit more with the color. So most of the time I do not like the color game with jerkbaits. I do think it's a little bit more important. Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about quickly with the jerkbait, I can't remember if this is the third or fourth thing, but anyways, different brands of jerkbaits will be vastly different in their actions. You will see some jerkbaits that come through the water and they pretty much just dig, where they are just pretty much straight in the water, kind of like this towards you, doing this. Other jerkbaits will really have more erratic side-to-side actions. So I have a number of different jerkbaits on my boat. The two that I fish the most are the Berkley Stunna and the Vision 110. Those are by far the ones that I fish the most. And it should be noted that a Berkley Stunna 112+1, which is this exact bait that I have right here. You can see it has a little bit bigger lip on it. It dives to the same depth as a normal Vision 110. So I hate getting in the weeds when it comes to things. I do think a jerkbait is a bait that you can get into the weeds a little bit more. There's just big differences in jerkbaits. And so I don't have a specific brand that I love. Besides, I do fish a lot of the Berkley Stunnas. I do fish a lot of the Vision 110s. But there's a number of them out there on the market that are really good ones. The Spro Mixed Stick is another one that has a special place in my heart. I've caught a lot of fish on that jerkbait as well. But just experiment out there with brands, and sometimes you will find that a certain action the bass really like. Okay, last thing that I want to talk to you real quick when it comes to the jerkbait is a way in working this bait that I have found to be crucial over really the last couple of years. And most of the time when I fish a jerkbait, no matter how soft I'm hitting it or, you know, aggressively working it or the cadence, I usually work it kind of down or to the side. Like when I'm popping it, it's boom, 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 kind of down to the side, boom, 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 boom. What I found to be a very good key at triggering bass to eat is 2 or 3, 4 times throughout a cast, instead of going down with your pauses, pop it up 2, 3 times, boom, boom, boom. You will find that upward motion of a jerkbait, because in the water, this bait is going to go from kind of going side to side and all over the place to all of a sudden you pop it 2, 3 times upwards and it goes choo, choo, choo. That change in motion, it can be a big triggering mechanism when it comes to fishing a jerkbait. So just test it out. When you're out there and you're casting around, pop it upwards a couple of times. I'm telling you, just try it. You will thank me later. You will thank me later. All right, guys, that's the jerkbait. Love a jerkbait. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. Also, you can check out my most recent video here, and don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear package deal. It's a good deal. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow.